So welcome to this week's video. If you've been with me for a while, welcome back. If you are new to my channel, please do subscribe and make comments. Subscribe is just a matter of pressing a button, and as long as you've got notifications on, it means that you'll know when I release videos, which I do fairly regularly. So yes, welcome to this video, which is actually going to be quite different. What I thought I would do is give you a little bit of a insight into where I'm up to with my overall body of work, which is for an exhibition called Landscape Inside Out next March 2022 at Gallery Oldham. And over the past weeks I've been sharing with you the sort of start points of paintings, how I prepare the boards, how I collect drawings and studies out on location, how I progress the paintings and all of that. But what I haven't really done as yet until now is to sort of put that into context with where I'm up to, given the fact at the beginning of the year I promised I'd share warts and all, which I've been doing, but I also said I would share, where I'm up to. And so I thought today I would use the opportunity to explain a little bit about that. So as you'll know, I'm working on sort of small groups of paintings which together make up the work for the exhibition, which is all about the local landscapes. So the moors, the woodland, the valleys in between, and so on. So what I did is I divided into 6 groups of work as a way really of enabling me to kind of develop the work and to sort of focus. Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do 30 paintings about landscape. It's like, how would you do that? So I split it up. I split it into different seasons, and there were certain topics I had. So if I just sort of tell you what the 6 different areas are. So I had moorland, and I split that into winter moors and heather or summer moors. And then I had woodland, and I split that into spring woodland and autumn woodland. And then I had 2 other groups. One of them is the edgelands, which you see behind me, and I'll have a little word about that in a minute. And the final one is a kind of a wonderful panoramic, which has, not surprisingly, all of those types of landscapes in front of me. And that is going to be a group of paintings that I'm just starting to develop now, and that's the very last group. And if you've been following for a while, you'll know that each month I've been going out and doing mark making related to that wonderful view. And I'm hopeful that some of those booklets as they are and the work from those will kind of somehow feed into that panoramic view group of works. And I'm calling that group either My Side of Town, I call it sometimes, or Closer to Home. And the way that this has panned out has evolved actually as a result of, to an extent, of the pandemic. When it's a joint exhibition, so Hugh Winterbottom is the other person that I'm exhibiting with at Gallery Oldham. And do go and give him a follow, because he also has a YouTube channel about his work. But when we put the proposal in and got it accepted, it was literally the beginning of 2020, so just before the pandemic hit. And at that time, things were not looking like they have been for the last 2 years. And so what we did was we focused in to a more local area than we had planned. But I think that has strengthened the work, and inevitably you have such ambitions, but once you start delving into the detail, when you get into the painting and into the studies on location, you just realise what a massive amount of work that is. So I think focusing it has helped, but it's also influenced things. And the panoramic view, called Closer to Home, is one particular example where I didn't even know about that walk and that panoramic view in that valley that you could walk into. But as a result of the pandemic and walking locally, I'm having to stay very local, that has kind of come out of that. So that's all kind of very interesting. Anyway, so those, I kind of digress, but those are the 6 groups. So that's all well and good, but I kind of then broke it down into those groups, and I would work on 1 or 2 at a time. I have to say that I found that working on more than 1 at a time was challenging. And in the end, I think I ended up just focusing on one at a time, and that seemed to work out better. And then sometimes I would come back to certain groups. So suffice to say that I have now got five of the 6 groups are there or thereabouts, and I'm about to start working on the 6th group. So that's all well and good. So what I wanted to do was to say, well, actually, once the paintings are done, as in you're happy with the composition, the colours, everything is done, the painting isn't actually done at that point. And let me explain what I mean. I mean, all of you that paint will know, but I think I wasn't aware of just how much time you have to put aside for all the things that follow on from the painting. So in my case, and I'll refer, and the reason I'm actually in my main room, which is a lot colder than the inside, in my little small room, which I kind of heat. This is the bigger area where I'm hanging my paintings that are done, or those that are in sort of transition. And then I work in that smaller area that you most often see me in. And I will show you some things in that, turn the camera around and do that later. But I wanted to be out here so I could sort of show you with what's on the walls, how this all pans out in terms of the progress of the paintings. So once the painting is done, then there is the fixing. Fixing is needed if you are using things like oil pastels or charcoal or things that are water soluble. They somehow have to be fixed on the surface. So that's the first thing that has to happen. And that happens as you evolve, as you go through the layers, because obviously if you put some wet paint on top of something that wasn't fixed, it would all smudge. But you still have to do that, seal that finally at the end, especially as oftentimes, in my case, I will often put things like oil pastel or charcoal or something on quite near the end. So that's the first thing. Then you have to seal it in. Now, I say you have to, it depends on what medium you're using, but for me, where I want to have intense colour, where I'm using a lot of collage paper, sealing in is really important. And so these ones here, which are my Edgelands paintings that I've just finished, and I have 6 of them, there's 4 that you can see here. These are fixed and sealed, so they're quite shiny at the moment. So once that's done, I then have to paint all of the edges, because once they sit in their frames, you see some of that edge, and so they have to all be cleaned up and painted, and I'll show you a bit about that in the little room in a minute. And then finally, I use a satin varnish on them, and again I'll show you that in a minute, but I use a satin varnish, 2 layers of that on the surface, which means that it's no longer shiny. So this one that you can see here is no longer shiny. You probably can't see on the video, but it's no longer shiny because it has been finished and it has been satin varnished with 2 coats. So at that point, they then can be taken to the framers. But what I do at that point is I then have them all photographed, and if you've seen some of what I do, I tend to go out onto a fire escape here where the light is really good, and I write on the back of them with all the details of the painting. I take them to the framers. Now, you can imagine that with the number that we've got to do and with the shortage of supplies, we are doing them in batches. So it's a little bit of a production line. So what I'm doing is taking them in groups as they're done, in the groups that I've worked on them at. So the Edgelands is a group, the Wintermoors is a group, and so on. So I've started having them framed, and I'm not going to show you in great detail here because it gives the game away too much and I don't want to do that, but I think you can see enough to know that these are framed, and we're using floating frames for our boards and canvases, or another name for them is tray frames, and we're using a very neutral white colour and just off-white actually. So these have been framed, and then they have cellophane wrapping just to protect their edges, and of course we'll bubble wrap them before we take them to the gallery. So when you've got this number of paintings to do, you have to kind of think about all those things. So I thought it would be worth me kind of explaining this. So over time I've started taking some of the batches, and there's a batch there at the moment, so my Heather Moores ones have just gone to the framers. So you kind of can see how this all pans out and the sort of like the complexity of it really. So you have to be a little bit organised. So as I say, some of them are done. These ones are ready for varnishing. They need another coat of their edge, the paint on their edges, and I'll show you that with you in a minute. And then these ones in the corner that you can just see, they have been framed. And then just finally, before I move to the other room, these ones here are on really lovely thick paper. They're mixed media studies that I've done that are paintings that I've done that are part of the Heather Moore's group, and they will be float mounted behind glass. So I've lifted off, so you can just see a little bit of them. I've lifted off, I've got the tissue paper over them, and then I use heavy boards. And I have to be careful because it's quite cold in here. So that's another thing to juggle, because I have to make sure that things set. I have to make sure the paper doesn't get damp. I have to make sure that things are flat and so on. So there's a whole raft of things. So I thought it would be useful to sort of talk you through those things. And of course, if you've got a nice warm studio, it's not quite the same. Although a lot of these processes you still have to kind of go through. What I'll do now is I'll take you into the little room, and so you can kind of see what I'm doing with the edges, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the products that I use. Okay, so I'm in the smaller area of the studio now, and I'm going to just take you through some of the things I talked about when I was with the paintings, in terms of the process and the things I use. So I talked about fixatives, so these are just two fixatives I use. It doesn't really matter what brand, but one is for the water soluble and the charcoal and so on, and one is for the oil pastel. I tend to use a Winsor & Newton and a Sennelier, but it's entirely up to you what one to use. And then I use in order to seal everything in, I'm using gloss medium. There are other products you can use, but I personally use gloss medium. Gloss medium is what I use to thin the paint. It's what I use to stick the collage on. It's what I use to seal everything in, and so that's what I use. And golden, it doesn't have to be golden, but I really like the golden product, so that's what I use. And then finally, once I've done the edges, and I'll talk about that in a little minute, I use on the surface of painting, I then use varnish, and I use 2 coats of this, and I'm very particular about my brushes for the varnish, and I have one for smaller paintings and one for larger paintings, and I make sure I keep them really pristine, and I use them just for varnish, for nothing else. And this one has UV protection. It's a water soluble one, and I just use these brushes. And when I'm brushing on, I just make sure I go in various ways with the brush. And when it dries to a nice sort of almost matte sort of sheen, and the shine is gone, which is great, because it's great to use the shiny, because it seals everything in and it brings out the colour. But I don't want shiny paint for me personally, especially for the landscape ones. I certainly don't want them shiny, so this really works well. And you really do need to have use 2 coats at least. And then finally, what I wanted to just mention is the edges, and this is a mix. Again, I'm very particular about the brush I use. I use one which is going to cover the edges well and is not going to give put its hairs out onto the painting. And I'm not going to sort of do too much of a demonstration here, but just suffice to say that when I'm doing it, I kind of tend to go right up to the edge, and bear in mind that you can make sure that it's not on the painting, because you can wipe it off. It's a shiny surface once you use the gloss medium, so it's easy to wipe off any paint. And I make this myself. I just mix it. It's a colour that's in the paintings, a light colour that works on my paintings, and I just mix it together. And this is a mix of white and a particular yellow and some medium. So that's all I do, and as I say, I do 2 coats of that, and I'm about to do the second coat on this group of paintings. So the only final thing I wanted to just mention was, and I forgot to say when I was in the other room, that last week we had a visit from Gallery Oldham to review where we were up to with the works, and that's really helpful because it forces you to sort of pull things together, but also to see what you've got. And at that, and I'll try and share an image, but there, at that meeting, I actually shared all of the concertina sketchbooks I had, and my monthly mark making, and some of the studies. And the exhibition itself is going to have those on show as well. And we're at the moment working out how we might present those so that they can sit alongside the painting. So hopefully some of you will be able to come and visit a gallery Oldham, and you'll be able to see the process itself and how the studies and those things and the sketchbooks and so on feed into the development of the finished work. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I hope that's given you more of an understanding of where I'm at, because otherwise you just sort of see me doing these bits and pieces on these different series and you wonder where all the groups are up to and how that sort of translates into the exhibition, which is next year. So hopefully you've got more of an insight, and I'm now going to be working on, that's what the studies are behind, on this last group of works, which is the panoramic view. And again, as usual, I'll share those with you. Okay, so thanks very much for watching, and please do like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your comments, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.